Right now, is there such a thing as a midlife crisis? The conventional wisdom, and I use the term loosely, is that the longer we live, the more depressed we can get. We get sad. Life just becomes a bit of a pain, and we suffer what some people are using as the phrase is midlife crisis, middle-age crazy, whatever you want to call it, euphemisms and variations on that same theme. Which I guess in some people's minds is an excuse to do something a little bit crazy with your life, sell the family van and get a sports car for yourself. I mean, a number of different things can happen. However, I've always thought it was just a bunch of horse hockey. And now there is a study from the University of Alberta that suggests that there is no such thing as a midlife crisis. Up Not Down was the study that was published in the academic journal Development Psychology. And it apparently debunks this long-held belief that happiness declines as we get older. I want to get some expert advice on this. Let's bring Gary Dernfeld into the conversation. Social worker, of course. The website is yoursocialworker.com. And always a great guest, and great to have you with us on the program. Gary, first of all, Happy New Year. I haven't talked to you for a while.
I know. Happy New Year to you, Bill.
This is an interesting topic. For those of us that are on the north side of 50, the old idea about middle-age crisis and middle-age crazy and midlife crises and things like this, it's a phrase that a lot of people bandy about back and forth. Have you ever believed in it?
Well, I got to tell you, when I was 40 years old, I thought I was going through my version of the midlife crisis. All of a sudden, everyone was telling me how old I was looking. I phone up a psychologist friend of mine looking for some sage advice, and all he says to me is, Dernfeld, ditch the beard. I did. So I ditched the beard for 6 months. Everyone started telling me how much younger I looked. But you know what? I got fed up with shaving, and back it came.
But were you happier?
I guess I got through that little rift feeling that I was aging. This midlife crisis, it's all about, it's more of an existential crisis. Who am I? Where am I? What am I? Am I at the... have I achieved what I set out to achieve for this stage of life? At this age, midlife, 40s, 50s, even up to 60s, we're now dealing not only with our own mortality, but the passing of family, parents, friends. So we're confronted with this mortality. And so we start questioning life, or at least some of us do.
Man, you just hit it on the head. As you always do. Because I was the idea about who am I and what am I going to do with my life, etc. I would think that technically is probably when you're about 18 to 25. You're thinking, I'm either finished school or about to finish school. Where am I going to go? Am I going to have a partner through life, etc., etc. By the time you get to be 40 or 45, a lot of those questions have been, if not resolved, at least answered, haven't they?
Well, the questions of adolescence is, what will I do with my life? And the questions of midlife is, what have I done with my life? And will I be able to retire? Will I be able to take care of myself? We're confronted by new questions as we look forward to the next 20 or 40 years. Now, I want to talk about this study out of Alberta.
Yeah.
What they did is they tracked, couple of thousand Albertans for the last 25 years to see if they're happier or less happier now than they were in adolescence. And what their study shows is that they're relatively as happy. There may have been a dip at some point, but they're typically even happier than they were in adolescence. But here's the problem with that survey. It only surveys kids or people in Alberta. And Alberta, over the last 25 years, saw the rise of the oil industry. I think if we do this survey again in 2 years' time, those very same people aren't going to be too happy anymore.
Well, exactly, because their economy's in a bit of a turmoil right now, so that's going on.
Exactly. So sometimes we got to look at the social, political, economic context in which these studies take place, the time in which they take place, and that can really influence results.
Okay, well, let me delve into the philosophical end of this then. When we say happy, a very subjective term. Happiness is, I know they've written songs about that, But that was a pop song back in the 1960s. But what is happiness? I mean, when you ask to somebody, even if you've been tracking them for the last 10 or 15 years and say, okay, Gary, are you happy? Does that mean you have a bigger house? Does that mean you're making a lot more money? Does that mean your mortgage is paid off? Does that mean you're at peace with yourself? What's happiness?
And that's a great question, because you know what? In these surveys, they're not necessarily defining, and in particular in this survey, they don't define happiness. They just ask it generally as if it's the same thing for everyone. But I think we can accept that happiness is a state of mind at which we feel at peace or good with what's going on in our life. And so people are going to define that differently for them, but we still, I think, all can appreciate the feeling that's associated with that.
So, again, in the eyes of the beholder, I guess, and depending on...
I think for happiness, yes, but having said that, I think many people would define it as being in a stable and caring relationship that's relatively free of conflict, being able to manage oneself economically. We're able to pay off our bills and manage, and our health is in relatively good shape. Then we're typically happy.
So would you expect the same sort of results, for instance, if that survey were done in Ontario?
No, not necessarily. And like I said, I think if that survey were done in another year or two, even in Alberta, I think the results are going to be skewed tremendously. The result of what I think is a recession out there. I don't know if anyone else has labeled it that way, but you got a province that was oil rich now going billions into debt and laying off thousands and thousands of people. Of course there's going to be a crisis.
Well, how do we make that determination about, being happy, being unhappy, being contented? And this is where, when I saw this term today, and again, this idea about, is there a midlife crisis? I'm wondering if that's a rationalization we use sometimes for the fact that we just feel as if we have to make some changes, or all of a sudden we need to take control of things.
Well, good point. Sometimes it's just an excuse for a party. The other thing, Bill, is, when the concept of the midlife crisis started being bandied about the 60s, 70s, 80s, we weren't living as long. And there was what we call homogeneity in the populace. In other words, we all had a more similar kind of lifestyle. The gender roles were more, man and woman, less amorphous between them. And, fast forward to 2016. My God, I'm still worried about Y2K. But, now in 2016, we're living way longer than we were in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So where the heck is midlife, and what are the issues we're grappling with now? So now midlife is pushed up to 50, 55, 60 in terms of our thinking. The issues are, retirement, how, when, is that going to be pushed out? Our health, what is our health as we're aging? And also now in this new age group, the graying generation, we are the generation with the growing divorce rate. So this midlife crisis thing, how it may have looked years ago, it looks very different in today's day and age.
What about the physicality of this? And because, when we talk about the phraseology of midlife crisis, middle-age crazy, or some of the other, phrases that can be used to try to describe what may or may not be happening, there are some physical changes that are occurring too. Does that have an impact? Clearly, with menopause with women, obviously, but now there's some evidence that there is a male menopause as well.
Right, andropause.
Exactly, and that's got to have an impact.
Absolutely. I turned 60 in February, so just a few short weeks away. I have a chronic sore back, and as I'm moaning and groaning to some of my friends and colleagues, they're looking at me saying, thanks for catching up, dear insult, because we've had that sore back for quite a while. And so maybe you too, Bill. I think you had your knees done.
Well, have you not joined the artificial joint club yet? Come on, everybody. Come on, you're north of 60.
So, and I like to do home renovations. I like to do, drywalling and plumbing and electrical. I can't do that stuff anymore, only for the aches and pains. So is this a midlife crisis? Is a later in life crisis? but we are all coming to terms with our changing body and our changing physical well-being.
How do you keep a healthy mind when you're doing that, though? Because just describing your situation, I mean, that's kind of like open season for possible depression to say, I can't do what I wanted to do anymore. You know,
so who the hell?
Or you pick up a baseball glove and a ball and figure, you know what, I'm going to pretend I'm 25 again. And all of a sudden, after about 2 throws, you figure, I got to go lay down.
Yeah, so who the hell says we keep a healthy mind about this? I'm mad as hell.
See?
But we do have to cope. We have to wrap our head around it. And most importantly, we have to adjust. All joking aside, we have to adjust. We at each decade, we're kind of realigning and retuning how we go through life, how we manage ourselves, how we look at our health, and how we look at our personal economic situation. And if we don't adjust, that's where we get into trouble.
You mentioned something off the top here that I found rather interesting, and it harkened back to, well, I'll give you a movie example. So let's draw this into pop culture. You remember, one of my favorite movies is the Norman Jewis movie Moonstruck, you know, with Cher and a great cast, you know. And as you remember,
for our listeners haven't a clue what that one was.
Oh, it's a great. Go watch it. It's fabulous. It's on Netflix. Go watch it. She won an Academy Award. Jewis won an Academy Award. Anyway, in the movie, without spoiler alert, her father, she's a grown-up woman, obviously. Her father is doing a little messing around, and you know the whole thing of the movie is, why do men do this? And it's because, as they concluded near the end of the movie, it's because of their fear of death.
Yeah.
And it's their mortality. And it seems as if just about everybody I talk to that is on the north side of about 55, all of a sudden, at some point in their life, Gary, there's an event that happens that all of a sudden throws them face to face with mortality, whether it's the death of a loved one or maybe somebody they went to school with or something. Death seems to be something that was always in the abstract. You know, when you were younger, okay, your 95-year-old aunt passed away, and it's too bad, but they had a good life, and, you know, maybe you went to the funeral. But all of a sudden, when you see people of your age bracket or your close circle of friends starting to pass away, it scares the hell out of you.
Absolutely. We're in the third and fourth quarter of the big game. And
well, like you look at yesterday, you know, we were talking about David Bowie, you know, who's a guy who had, in some way, shape, or form, an influence on an awful lot of our lives because of his music and his art. 69 years old, and boom, you figure, hey, that's not supposed to happen.
I know, that is so young, and this is a guy with all the money in the world where he could have had the best treatment, you know, known in mankind. And so if he's vulnerable, what does that say of you and I, Bill? And so we are aware of our own mortality. It is forever in the back of our mind. And for some folks who don't manage it appropriately, okay, that's why we have to adjust. Those who don't adjust turn to drugs, alcohol, wine, booze, and I was going to say fast woman, but we don't use those phrases anymore. But I think you know what I mean. Turning to thrill-seeking behavior.
And that was the premise of the movie in Moonstruck. In other words, he wants to get as much living in as he can because he may die tomorrow.
Exactly. So I want to urge our listeners, if you're dealing with a midlife crisis, if you're reevaluating your life, slow down, do take a good long look at it, and try and figure out, what are my new goals? What will my legacy be? What's my leave behind? What is my impact on others? How do I repair for things that may need repairing? And by that I mean, of course, interpersonal relationships, so that when we are on death's door and we are, ready to take the step into the great beyond, do we die with what Eric Erikson, a great psychologist, said, do we die with integrity or despair? And great discussion on this one. If we are satisfied with our life and we feel good about ourselves, he says we die with integrity. If we don't, feel good about ourselves and relationship intact, he says we die with a sense of despair. And, of course, the psychological perspective is we do want to pass on with that sense of integrity, feeling good about ourselves and our relationship.
It's amazing the sorts of mind games we actually play with ourselves, though, in this circumstance. And I know, as one fellow told me, who we had this discussion, I guess a lot of us do at this time, He simply said, look, worrying about it's only going to make it happen faster. So, live your life, for God's sakes.
Yeah, I am seeing more and more folks our age and older, so the senior set, in my counseling practice, where they're trying to sort out relationships with their adult children. It used to be I'm seeing the 30-somethings, 40-somethings dealing with their school age and adolescent kids, but it's weird because now I'm seeing many more folks in their 60s, 70s, and 80s trying to sort out relationships with adult children. These are the ones who are facing integrity versus despair in their passing and want to go with that sense of integrity.
Happiness. I mean, it's like I say, it's a great topic and a great phrase, and dealing with our own problems and crises. And I guess oftentimes we're still in this. I've got about 30 seconds left here. We always seem to want to put a label on something. Our feeling of sadness or a feeling of mortality or whatever else like that. We've got to put a label on that. And I guess that's part of the rationalization.
Yes. I tell people don't chase happiness. In fact, instead of that, chase responsibility. Because the truth of the matter is, as you are responsible, you're no longer getting in trouble. And you're meeting needs and you're meeting other people's needs. If you do that, then you're happy.
YourSocialWorker.com is the website. Some great stuff on there and some great links as always. Gary, thanks so much for this. Great talking with you again today.